Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Number 9. The Hong Kong-Macau Bridge. The Hong Kong-Macau Bridge has been called a $20 billion waste of money. The bridge is most certainly an impressive feat of engineering. It's a bridge/tunnel system moving 34 miles across 4 artificial islands. It's the longest sea crossing in the world, designed to connect Hong Kong with Macau and mainland China. It was built to last at least 120 years, with its construction costing approximately $18.8 billion. Originally, it was estimated to only be $7.56 billion, but things don't always turn out as they're planned. The construction was fueled by bank loans, which were divided among various governments in China, Hong Kong, and Macau. It was completed in February 2018, and it's still open today. It's a fully functioning bridge that you can drive from Hong Kong to mainland China. The issue is that nobody uses it. The bridge sounds good in theory. It cut down travel times between Zhuhai and Hong Kong from 4 hours to just 30 minutes. It was all part of a strategy to turn the Pearl River Delta into an economic development hub. But Hong Kong is a bit of a wild card in this scenario. You can't just go from Hong Kong to mainland China in your own vehicle on a whim. There's paperwork that needs to be done if you want to cross the bridge. There's a whole lot of bureaucracy that stops people from taking this simple 30-minute drive. Imagine if every time you want to cross state lines, you have to fill out paperwork and get a permission slip. It would seriously hamper travel, and that's what happened here. Instead of the bridge being super busy, it's often completely empty. Number 8. The Egyptian Space Agency. In the 1960s, Egypt abandoned their space program. America and Russia were light years ahead of them, no pun intended. The government was strapped for cash, so they quit the space race. Now, Egypt is back into it. They've started a massive project to create an entirely new space program that will cost an unbelievable amount of money. It all starts on the outskirts of Cairo, inside the glass building of the new Egyptian Space Agency. In August 2017, Egypt announced the development of their new agency. People were doubtful because in the same month, the country accepted a bailout of $12 billion. Where were they going to get the money to compete with the likes of NASA? It didn't help that Egypt has a terrible history with space in general. In 2010, they lost contact with their first non-commercial satellite. It was a spectacular failure. Pretty much everyone agreed that building a new space agency and spending millions of dollars on what will supposedly be a city in the desert is a bad idea. Fast forward from 2017 to 2022, construction work was heavily underway. 2022 saw the beginning of construction on 8 out of the 23 proposed buildings in what's been dubbed Egyptian Space City. This city will include a space academy, a planetarium, a fancy hotel, and a place for prayer. There is supposed to be a space museum and a satellite assembly station. Parts of this city are under construction now, but economists are still certain the whole thing is going to fail at a cost of tens of millions of dollars. And now for number 7. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Six Gun Miller and Kinder Dance More for supporting this channel. Thank you so much! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Number 7. The Darian Scheme. The Darian Scheme was a botched megaproject from the 17th century. William Peterson, a man from Scotland who helped found the Bank of England, made a fortune in the 1600s through international trade. William traveled extensively through the West Indies and many parts of the Americas. He was the first man to understand the importance of Panama for the international transportation of goods. Today, the Panama Canal is one of the busiest shipping routes in the world, connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. In 1693, William had the great idea to establish a colony of Scotsmen in what is now Panama, on the Isthmus of Panama to be exact. He figured that if he could build a Scottish city at the thin neck of land separating North and South America, he could capitalize on the future of international trade. Just about every single Scotsman who had money to spare contributed to the Darian Scheme, while thousands volunteered to travel abroad and start the new colony. Taking money from Scots earned William an enormous fortune. It was enough to build a new megacity and an overland route between the Pacific and the Atlantic. As you may know already, the Panama Canal is artificial. North and South America were connected by a thin strip of land in the 17th century. William wanted to build a great road going from one side to the other. Goods would be dropped off on one side, transported to the other, and set off on a different boat on a different ocean. The issue was that William had not physically been to what is now Panama. The first ship set sail in July 1698, arriving in October that same year. The first thing they did when they went to shore was dig graves for the people who died on the boat trip. The eager colonists hadn't expected to discover a jungle thick with mosquitoes and a serious lack of food. Within 7 months, 400 more people had died. Even more were starving or on the verge of death from fever. The scheme was abandoned when they realized they weren't cut out for jungle life. Even today, the Darien Gap is a death trap filled with criminal gangs, snakes, and the threat of death from bites, exposure, and drowning. Thousands try to cross the gap every year to try and get to North America, and many never make it. It's one of the world's most dangerous journeys. So you can imagine back in the day, the first party decided to give up, but news didn't travel back to Scotland fast enough. 6 more ships set sail in 1699. The pioneers sailed across the ocean while the earlier settlers abandoned the new city. Out of the 16 ships that sailed, only 1 returned with a small handful of survivors. 2,000 lives were lost, and the Scottish economy nearly went bankrupt. It was the first real, useless megaproject since, well, everyone died. Number 6. The dystopian nightmare. China's attempt at urban growth has led to the creation of over 50 abandoned megacities. The empty towers and desolate streets have created dystopian landscapes across the country. There are great monuments, spacious parks, and vast roadways where not a single person can be found. You see a great skyline in the distance with hundreds of towering structures. But as you get close, there are only some stray dogs in the streets. It feels like you've been transported to the end of time. Nobody knows how many of these ghost cities there are in China. Some of them have been completed and abandoned, while others have a handful of residents. Most are the result of the overambitious plan by the government to construct new cities before anyone lives in them. The idea was that if they built the apartments, people would migrate there and the city would grow. Kangbashi district is a perfect example of this failure. The Kangbashi development site is 90,000 acres, positioned at the edge of the Gobi Desert near the border of Mongolia. It has everything you would expect from a modern city, from giant shopping malls to residential complexes. The hope was that the city would draw commuters from nearby cities, hopefully around the number of 2 million. Instead, they managed to attract about 100,000. That's still a lot of people, but in a place designed for 2 million, it's peanuts. Imagine if you lived in an apartment with 100 rooms spread across 10 floors, but only 10 people live there, giving each of them a whole floor to themselves. That's essentially what happened here, and in the dozens of other ghost cities across China. Number 5. The H3. The H3 has been dubbed the most useless highway in America. It's on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, completed in December 1997. The highway is most definitely a modern marvel. It was built through a system of ducts so that the local ecosystem is preserved, and it contains some high-tech tunnels. However, it's been called a road to nowhere. The H3 was supposed to cost $250 million, but it ended up costing $1.3 billion. The whole point of the road was for it to run across the Mauna Loa Valley, making it easy for deploying troops from one side of the island to the other. Orders for the freeway were given in 1960 when this was a legitimate concern. But because of massive community protests, it took 20 years before construction started. By the time the highway was finished, troop movement wasn't nearly as important as it was in the 60s. The biggest issue today is that there are a lot of native Hawaiians who refuse to use it. They could, but they just don't want to. It comes down to culture and heritage. During the construction, significant ancient religious sites were destroyed. Native Hawaiians were already furious about the construction of H3, but destroying their cultural heritage was a real slap in the face. Now they refuse to use one of the most expensive roads in the USA. Number 4. The Berlin-Brandenburg Airport. The Berlin-Brandenburg Airport is not a name known by very many international travelers. Yet the name has been around since 1990. That was when developers started talking about building a new airport in Berlin. There was trouble from the very beginning. First, the developers took 6 years to settle on a spot for the building. Then it took a decade before ground was broken and construction started. Through the construction, more and more problems kept popping up. The airport was supposed to open in 2011, but that didn't happen. The global financial crisis in 2008 made funds a serious problem. Instead of pausing construction, German politicians used public money to keep on building. The airport was supposed to open 7 times, but kept missing the dates. The biggest embarrassment was in June 2012, with public broadcasters expected to go live for 24 hours with coverage. It was supposed to be a big deal for the revitalization of Germany. Instead, building inspectors reported 120,000 defects. Not just a couple safety violations, over 100,000 defects. There were fire safety issues, automatic doors that didn't work, even the roof was sagging. There were also 106,000 miles of cable found to be too dangerous. Many of the lights didn't turn on, with a lot of stuff wired wrong. It took almost another decade, but finally the Berlin-Brandenburg International Airport was ready to open in 2020. When the airport was finally ready for takeoff, the coronavirus pandemic shut down air travel. The airport is running now that the pandemic is over. It isn't quite as useless as it was for the 30 years since its inception. However, now it's not even big enough. It was designed to handle 27 million passengers a year. But it's not enough with the enormous spike in travelers since 1990. An expansion project will cost another $2.7 billion, or the entirety of the original budget, just to increase the capacity of the airport by 2030. Number 3. Forest City. There is a luxury estate city in Malaysia that cost around $100 billion to create. It was supposed to be a living paradise by the name of Forest City. Instead, 6 years after its development, it turned into a ghost town. Forest City has empty skyscrapers and deserted roads, looking just like the ghost cities found in China. Forest City is just north of Singapore, spread across a whopping area of 4,300 acres. That makes it 4 times bigger than Monaco. It was expected that 700,000 people would flock to the city upon its opening. As of 2019, only 500 people had moved in. That is a staggeringly low number. Although the population has grown in the past 4 years by a few thousand, it's still at under 5% expected occupancy. Forest City is a beautiful place, just like something out of a futuristic sci-fi movie. It has green spaces, incredibly advanced apartment complexes, and an international school, and has 2 resorts with no guests, and a giant mall with no shoppers. But get this, apartment prices in Forest City are staggering. Don't think you can move to Malaysia and buy an apartment in a ghost town for dirt cheap. It's not going to happen. In 2017, prices started at about $170,000 for an apartment. Today, condos are retailing for around $1.14 million. Number 2. The Ghost Tower. The abandoned skyscraper in the heart of Bangkok has become as much of a tourist attraction as the Royal Palace. It used to be called the Sathorn Unique Tower, but since it's been abandoned for years, it's become known as the Ghost Tower Bangkok. Construction began in the 1990s, with the building being part of an ambitious project to create architectural marvels across the Bangkok skyline. Financial setbacks caused the project to halt in 1997. Ever since, the unfinished tower has been haunting the city. There is no positive outlook for the building's future. It's likely never going to be finished, with its only visitors being urban explorers. You used to be able to climb the tower, albeit illegally, and take pictures from its top. But in recent years, security has made that a bit more challenging. There are whispers that it could be turned into an observation deck, but nobody really knows. Number 1. Yucca Mountain Repository. 100 miles outside Las Vegas is a hole in the ground that costs $19 billion to make. The tunnel is 5 miles underneath Yucca Mountain, abandoned for about a decade. It was supposed to be the answer to the nuclear waste problem in America. Nuclear waste from the San Onofre nuclear power plant was supposed to be decommissioned here. Instead, when the plant shut down in 2012, 536 tons of nuclear fuel was buried beneath a concrete slab. Congress designated the Yucca Mountain Repository to be a safe nuclear waste facility in 1987. They dug a tunnel, which cost an insane amount of money to complete. But no nuclear waste was ever put in the hole. It was never licensed, then the project was abandoned. There were concerns that the nuclear waste could seep into the ground and poison the drinking supply of the farming communities nearby. However, government scientists said it was a safely manageable risk. Risk or not, Yucca Mountain has been a huge political debacle with no solution in sight, and sadly no way to get back the billions of dollars taken from the taxpayers to build the empty tunnel. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Kaf Palace. The historic Kaf Palace in Saudi Arabia is an interesting structure in the middle of nowhere. Construction of this massive desert fortress began during the reign of Nawaf bin Nuri al-Shalan in 1338. On the main gate of the palace is an actual document chiseled into the rock that gives the details of the construction so we can understand exactly how it was made so long ago. Not only was this a huge palace built in the middle of an otherwise empty desert, but it was also a military stronghold. It was built on a small hill so that it can look out over the surrounding flatlands, and it was made of finely textured stone. It almost blends into the desert because the rock is the same color as the sand. Even after almost 700 years standing, Kaf Palace is in surprisingly good condition. There is still the old council building, the palace mosque, the women's residence, along with the warehouses and the kitchens. There is even a prison that had once been used for holding all manner of criminals and traitors. Forgotten Fortress in Iran. Archaeologists in southwestern Iran recently excavated a long-lost fortress in the middle of nowhere. They found it among the arid plains of Dedasht, a world of intense heat, sweeping panoramas of nothing, and a bleached blue sky. Unfortunately, we don't know a whole lot about this mysterious fortress. It just kind of rose up out of the sand, and archaeologists are now struggling to study it as quickly as possible. It was actually back in 2020 when they first came across pottery fragments, which ultimately led them to the foundations of the fortress. Archaeologists believe the building was probably restored at least 3 times throughout the centuries, and that it may have had something to do with the ancient city of Dedasht. Dedasht was built by order of Shapur the Great, second king of the Sassanid dynasty, who reigned from between 241 and 272 AD. It was during his rule that the empire stretched all the way from southern Arabia to Georgia way in the north, and even all the way to the river valleys of Mesopotamia. It was a time of great architectural advancements, a kind of renaissance for the builders, and it was a time when the Arabian world was growing highly sophisticated with everything from metalworking to expressing themselves through their language. It's not exactly clear what this mysterious buried fortress, half ruined in a sandy stretch of nowhere, has to do with the great city of Dedasht. It could have been some kind of military outpost, but we just don't know yet. Kropfenstein Cave Castle. There is a castle of remarkable ingenuity in the country of Switzerland. A castle so strange and mysterious you've probably never even heard of it before. It's called Kropfenstein Castle, and it's a ruined hill fort located quite literally on the side of a mountain. It's not built on a plateau or carved on an overhang. It's right on the sheer face of a flat cliff wall. There is a small lip that's been carved out of the rock from where you can enter the castle. Otherwise, you would have to scale hundreds of feet straight up like Spider-Man, or flap your wings and fly there. It's kind of a hybrid castle, with a towering shell-like wall on the outside, but inside it descends into a series of natural caves and grottos. We don't know who built it or when. Researchers believe it was probably constructed around the year 1312, and that it was occupied by a distinguished family, maybe the Kropfensteins. Nobody can say for sure, since there are no written records of the residents of Kropfenstein Castle, nor any real clues about the site itself. The Kropfenstein family died out sometime in the 15th century. Every last member of the family just gone, ending their name once and for all. And it was around the same time that this castle fell into disrepair and was abandoned. It hasn't been used since, and is still barely clinging to the mountainside in the middle of nowhere in Switzerland. the doorway to the underworld. In the middle of Siberia, miles away from civilization, there is a place the locals call the doorway to the underworld. It's a huge crater, the biggest of its kind in the world. It's nearly 1 mile long and goes down 282 feet deep. It's something known as a mega slump and is officially called the Batagaiga crater. The scary thing is that it keeps getting bigger every year. The crater began to form in the 1960s. Because of deforestation in the Siberian wilderness, the ground was exposed to massive amounts of sunlight. This caused the soil to get warm. The permafrost hiding underneath started to thaw, and then it melted entirely. When the ice melted under the ground above caved in, forming the crater. With warmer temperatures in the Arctic regions and in Siberia, the crater continues to get even bigger as more ice melts and the ground keeps sinking. Frank Gunther from the Alfred Wegener Institute said it's been growing at an average rate of about 33 feet every year. And scientists from the University of Sussex say that the hole has gotten so deep that its sedimentary layers have revealed 200,000 years worth of Earth's geological history. It's quite the pit, even if it doesn't actually lead to the depths of hell like the locals say it does. As for how big this mysterious hole could get, it doesn't seem to have a limit. It shows no signs of stopping, and it's about to break into a valley and turn into an even bigger crater. Pretty soon, it's going to become its own cave system. And now for number 6. But first, it's shout-out time! Big thank you to DJ Matacoro and Carrier Aubrey for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. We'd love to have you! The Jeda Rock. The Jeda Rock is one of the greatest archaeological mysteries in the United States. Located deep in the mountains of North Carolina, it is a huge boulder carved with pictographs of animals and animal tracks, while others appear to be human figures, suns, and geometric figures. But nobody knows where the rock came from. This slab is about 16 feet long by 11 feet wide and dates back to around 2000 BC. The rock must have had some extremely sacred significance to whoever made it and somehow lasted over time and the elements. In the 19th century, the Cherokee were known to hold ceremonies around the rock. They would camp in the area and use similar types of rock called soapstone to carve out pipes, beads, bowls, all kinds of things. Archaeologists have discovered that the rock was part of a large group of soapstone objects. The Cherokee associated the rock with a giant named Judakula, or Tzulkalu. He was a hunter known as the Great Slant-Eyed Giant who lived in the southwestern slope. He was very powerful and could control the wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. He was known to drink whole streams down in a single gulp and stomp from mountain to mountain. According to legend, Judakula was the one who made the marks on the stone when he was jumping from one mountaintop to another. The stone was there even before the Cherokee, and so it is a huge mystery. There are supposedly 2 other stones in the area, but the mountains are so rural and isolated, nobody's officially documented them. As the Judakula rock erodes and its pictographs fade, the North Carolina Rock Art Survey has organized a Judakula Advisory Committee composed of site owner Jackson County, North Carolina, members of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Tribal Historic Preservation Office and tribal elders, the Office of State Archaeology, professors from nearby Western Carolina University, and more, who are all working together to see if they can preserve the rock. Lost Ring Fort. A shocking find was recently made in Ireland of a long-lost ring fort. The previously unknown enclosure, a massive structure in the middle of a place called the Golden Vale, was found by accident. It was a volunteer working with an open-source map application called OpenStreetMap, basically the Wikipedia version of Google Maps, who found the lost fort. Her name is Anne Distel, and she was working on the project in Ireland when she spotted a mysterious circular mark in the satellite images near the town of Garyard. Realizing that this strange mark had some historic value, she began investigating. She couldn't find it mentioned anywhere, not on any of the old records, and not on any older maps. She then contacted Jean Farley at the National Monument Service, who confirmed it to be a brand new historical site. The structure is now being called TS-053-102 until it gets a proper name. The structure is either one of 2 things. It's either an enclosure where some ancient farmers kept their animals, and if that's not the case, then it's a ring fort that was once occupied by a family of farmers. Thousands of years ago, this would have dominated the countryside. It would have been on a slight hill so that they could see in all directions, down into the forest and through the fields. The whole family would have lived inside a modest home in the center of the fort, protected from potential attackers by the fort's high walls. The destruction of the Guidestones. The Georgia Guidestones were a strange collection of 6 granite tablets arranged in the shape of a star. They were nicknamed the American Stonehenge and were engraved with a series of rules that their commissioner believes people need to follow in order to restore humanity after an apocalypse. For years, the Georgia Guidestones stood in the middle of nowhere as a strange and ominous structure with a creepy message. The stones stood 19 feet tall and were erected back in 1980. All we know about the person who commissioned the construction of the stones is that they were extremely wealthy, and they went under the name R.C. Christian. There are several conspiracy theories about who he was, including rumors that the New World Order or Satanists were behind the Guidestones. The stones described in detail how mankind could thrive in future generations in harmony with the earth and all life, as long as a series of rules were followed. Its main rule was to keep the world population at 500 million or less. The messages were written in 8 main languages, including English, Hebrew, and Russian. They were also written in 4 ancient languages, including Babylonian and Egyptian. These disconcerting stones have been vandalized over the years since conspiracy theorists believe they are satanic or part of the Illuminati order. In July of 2022, it was partially destroyed in a bombing attack at 4 in the morning. Lost cities in Arabia. Archaeologists in the United Arab Emirates have found some extremely mysterious structures in the middle of the desert. These structures date back 8,500 years, making them the oldest buildings in the region. According to the Department of Culture and Tourism in Abu Dhabi, these structures are at least 500 years older than anything else found in the UAE. The buildings were found on the island of Gaga, a hot and dry no-man's land that's about as remote as you can get. The structures aren't all that impressive, but they are pretty interesting. They appear to be just simple round rooms, like cubicles with stone walls that rise over 3 feet above the ground. The team of scientists doing the excavations believe the structures were probably tiny houses inside an equally tiny community. These Neolithic people would have lived on the island all year, getting their food from the sea and hunting larger game on the mainland. Archaeologists found things like stone arrowheads and even a body buried under one of the tiny houses from 5,000 years ago. This was a totally self-sufficient community stationed on a barren husk of land that today is nothing but an island desert with no life whatsoever. Giant phallus statue. In the small Peruvian town Moche, located way up the northern coast, there is a very strange structure. It's not an ancient structure, but it has become the latest tourist attraction for this tiny town. The reason it's so interesting is that, first of all, it was created as a special tribute to the great Moche civilization that dominated much of Peru thousands of years ago, way before the Inca. And second of all, because the statue has a gigantic male organ, a huge red-painted part that sticks out nearly 4 feet. It's become the most popular statue in town, and tourists are now visiting from all over Peru just to get a picture with it. According to the mayor of the town, Arturo Bazan, the statue is meant to represent abundance and fertility. He went on to explain that the ancient Moche people had once harnessed the power of the Moche River to turn the whole region into a fertile plain where life flourished and plants grew. Today, the whole place is more of a dry, wasted desert, and nothing much remains of the Moche culture except their nearby temples, which haven't been occupied in over 1,300 years. The alien monuments of Nuku Hiva. Nuku Hiva is the biggest island in French Polynesia, and so it's no surprise that this place has a long and rich history. It's a tropical paradise with very few residents and a whole lot of bizarre monuments spread along its beautiful coastlines and hidden far from society in the island's lush jungles. These monuments date back to around the 11th century and were probably made as depictions of the great deities worshipped by the people of Nuku Hiva. Either that, or they are monuments to alien visitors from another world. It was in the 1900s when archaeologists first started exploring the island looking for lost structures, ancient temples, and hidden treasures. They immediately began to find stone monuments scattered across the landscape. They dated the arrival of the Nuku-Hivans to around 150 BC and said they made the statues about 1,000 years later. One of the weirdest things is trying to figure out why it took them so long to build the statues. If they really were depictions of their traditional gods, they could have built them much sooner. Instead, it almost seems as if some great event inspired the islanders to suddenly start building huge statues upwards of 8 feet tall, with giant heads, strangely alien eyes, and unusually short limbs. Some conspiracy theorists say it was aliens who visited the Nuku-Hivans in the 11th century, and they built the statues as reflections of the visitors from outer space. Thanks for watching! Which of these did you like the most? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!